The strike did not just hit a gas field. It struck at the very foundation of Iran's energy system, and with it, a critical pillar of the global energy balance. In a conflict already simmering at dangerous levels, the targeting of South Pars marked a decisive and deeply consequential escalation, one that is now reverberating far beyond the Persian Gulf. South Pars is not simply another industrial site. It is the largest offshore natural gas field in the world, a vast reservoir shared between Iran and Qatar beneath the waters of the Persian Gulf. Its scale is almost difficult to comprehend. With an estimated 1,800 trillion cubic feet of recoverable gas, it holds enough energy to meet global demand for well over a decade. For Iran, it is not just a strategic asset. It is the backbone of the nation's entire energy ecosystem. When Israeli strikes hit key infrastructure tied to this field, including processing facilities near the coastal hub of Asaluya, the implications were immediate and profound. This was not a symbolic strike. It was a calculated move aimed at disrupting Iran's primary source of domestic energy production and, by extension, its economic stability. In response, Iran expanded its retaliation, directing attacks toward energy-related targets across the wider Middle East, signaling that the battlefield was no longer confined to isolated military zones, but had expanded into the arteries of global energy supply. To understand the magnitude of this escalation, one must first understand what South Pars represents within Iran's national framework. The field accounts for approximately 70 to 75% of Iran's total gas production. This is not surplus energy destined primarily for export. More than 90% of this gas is consumed domestically. It fuels homes, powers industries, and sustains electricity generation across the country. In practical terms, South Pars is not just an economic engine. It is a lifeline for everyday life in Iran. Gas-fired power plants generate the overwhelming majority of Iran's electricity, making the country heavily dependent on consistent and uninterrupted gas flows. Any disruption to the supply chain risks cascading failures across the entire energy grid. During peak demand periods, particularly in extreme weather, Iran has already faced shortages leading to blackouts. Now, with infrastructure under attack, the margin for stability is shrinking rapidly. The implications extend beyond households. Iran's industrial sector relies heavily on natural gas, not only as a source of power, but as a raw material. Petrochemical plants depend on it to produce plastics, fertilizers, and a wide range of industrial goods. Disruptions here ripple outward into manufacturing, agriculture, and export markets. In essence, the strike on South Pars is not merely a military action. It is an attempt to pressure Iran at the structural level of its economy. But the consequences are not contained within Iran's borders. The global energy market is already reacting with heightened volatility. Oil and gas prices have surged as fears grow over the security of supply routes and production infrastructure in one of the world's most critical energy corridors. The Persian Gulf is not just a regional waterway. It is a choke point through which a significant portion of the world's energy flows. Any threat to stability here sends immediate shockwaves through global markets. Investors and governments alike are now recalibrating risk. The concern is not only about the direct damage to infrastructure, but about what comes next. Energy facilities have become legitimate targets in this expanding conflict, and that reality introduces a new level of uncertainty. The fear is not hypothetical, it is systemic. If attacks continue to escalate, the potential exists for widespread disruptions across multiple countries, affecting both production and transportation. Iran's export capabilities, while limited compared to some of its neighbors, are also under strain. Unlike Qatar, which has built extensive liquefied natural gas infrastructure, Iran relies primarily on pipelines to export gas to neighboring countries such as Turkey and Iraq. These exports are modest in global terms, but they are vital for regional energy stability. Following the strike, gas flows to Iraq were halted as Iran redirected supply to meet domestic needs, underscoring how quickly external commitments can be sacrificed in times of internal pressure. This shift has immediate implications for Iraq's power sector, which depends significantly on Iranian gas to fuel its electricity generation. A disruption here risks triggering energy shortages and instability in a country already grappling with complex internal challenges. What begins as a strike on a gas field in Iran quickly becomes a regional issue, affecting multiple nations and amplifying existing vulnerabilities. The broader geopolitical dimension cannot be ignored. By targeting South Pars, the conflict has crossed a critical threshold. Energy infrastructure has now entered the battlefield in a direct and sustained manner. This raises the stakes considerably. Historically, such assets have often been treated as off-limits due to the catastrophic global consequences their disruption can trigger. That restraint now appears to be eroding. The strategic calculus behind such a move is complex. On one hand, targeting energy infrastructure can weaken an adversary's economic resilience and domestic stability. On the other, it risks provoking retaliatory actions that can spiral beyond control. Iran's response, expanding its attacks to energy targets across the region, suggests that this escalation is already underway. The risk of miscalculation is growing. As more actors become entangled and as critical infrastructure becomes increasingly vulnerable, the margin for error narrows. Each strike carries the potential to trigger a chain reaction, drawing in additional players and further destabilizing an already fragile region. Global powers are watching closely, and their responses will shape the trajectory of this crisis. The stakes are not confined to regional security. They extend to the global economy. Energy prices influence everything from inflation to industrial production, from transportation costs to food prices. A sustained disruption in the Gulf could have far-reaching consequences, affecting economies far removed from the immediate conflict zone. At the same time, the situation highlights a deeper structural reality. The world remains heavily dependent on a relatively small number of critical energy hubs. When one of these hubs comes under threat, the entire system feels the strain. Diversification efforts, strategic reserves, and alternative energy investments can mitigate some risks, but they cannot fully insulate the global economy from shocks of this magnitude. Looking ahead, several scenarios emerge. If attacks on energy infrastructure continue, we may see a prolonged period of volatility in global markets, accompanied by increased military presence in key transit routes. Diplomatic efforts may intensify as international actors seek to prevent further escalation, but the window for de-escalation may be narrowing. Alternatively, a temporary stabilization could occur if both sides recognize the broader consequences of targeting critical infrastructure. However, such restraint would require a recalibration of strategy and a willingness to prioritize long-term stability over short-term tactical gains, an outcome that is far from guaranteed in the current climate. What is clear is that the strike on South Pars has altered the dynamics of the conflict. It has transformed energy infrastructure from a background consideration into a central battleground. It has elevated the risks, expanded the scope, and intensified the global implications of an already volatile situation. And perhaps most importantly, it has underscored a fundamental truth about modern conflict. In an interconnected world, the line between local and global consequences is increasingly blurred. What happens in a single gas field in the Persian Gulf can ripple outward, shaping markets, influencing policy decisions, and affecting the daily lives of people thousands of miles away. As this situation continues to evolve, the focus will remain on two critical questions: how far this escalation will go, and whether the mechanisms of diplomacy can keep pace with the accelerating momentum of conflict. A major strike on Iran's South Pars gas field has pushed an already volatile regional conflict into a new and dangerous phase. By targeting the core of Iran's energy system, the escalation has triggered retaliatory actions, disrupted regional energy flows, and sent shockwaves through global markets. As energy infrastructure becomes an active battlefield, the risks of broader instability are rising, placing both regional security and the global economy on an increasingly uncertain path.